Today on Blue 58, except for preseason game, training camp is all but over. So as we wait for kickoff, let's make one last prediction as to who is going to be on the Packers' 53-man roster.
Blue 58!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Blue 58, the one and only podcast of thepowersweep.com. I'm your host, John Meerdink. Happy to be with you here for another episode. Every year it seems like training camp goes by faster and faster. No exception this year. We're done. The Packers have all but broken camp here. They wrapped up their final practice of training camp earlier today, and now we're just waiting for kickoff on preseason game number 3. Jordan Love is going to be back on the field, and a bunch of other guys are going to be fighting for their NFL lives. That fight, unfortunately, is over for a couple of guys on the Packers roster already, though a couple of other guys are getting a chance to show what they can do in one last preseason game. First and foremost, Devin Funchess has been moved to injured reserve, ending his season, a disappointing end to his comeback tour. It looked like he had a real shot to make the roster coming out of that first preseason game, but unfortunately, that was the last that we got to see of Devin Funchess. And I kind of get the sense this is going to be the last go-round for him. You know, it's been a 2-year journey, or it will be a 2-year journey by the time this season comes to an end, and boy, timing never worked out there for Devin Funchess. Do not blame him at all for opting out last year, given when they had to make that decision and what we knew at the time. It felt like he made the best call for him and his family, and of course he would probably agree with that. I think he seems to have no regrets and gave it his best shot this year, and unfortunately his body just did not agree here. Worth a shot on both sides here, and I think this is probably where it comes to an end. Same kind of goes for Chris Blair. No real injury limitations there, but it was going to be a long shot for him to make the roster anyway. Liked his physical ability. It just was going to be a tough uphill climb to make the roster, and it got all that much tougher with Randall Cobb in town. The Packers have signed 2 new players heading into their final preseason game, Abdullah Anderson and Steven Denmark, one defensive lineman, one cornerback. Let's talk about Anderson first. 6'3", 303 pounds out of Bucknell University. Go Bison. Bucknell, the collegiate home of Packers great Clark Hinkle, for whom Clark Hinkle Field is named in Green Bay. Good athlete is Mr. Anderson. 8.45 relative athletic score. He's appeared in 7 games in his NFL career, 6 with the Bears in 2019, where he recorded 1 sack, 1 with the Vikings in 2020. He was on the Bears roster for both Packers-Bears games in 2019, but did not appear in either one of them. So, having been signed by the Bears and the Vikings and now the Packers, he just needs to fill out his NFC North score sheet with one more visit to Detroit, and that should be it for him as far as the NFC North goes. Honestly, it's a long shot to make the roster at this point, but as far as the Packers are concerned, you might as well kick the tires on some big dudes because the Packers are still pretty light on big dudes. There's not a lot of 300-pounders on the roster right now. Anderson just over 300 pounds, so not the biggest lineman, but it never hurts to have a deep bench of guys you can call on and be familiar with when you need some big guys, and Anderson certainly qualifies there. Speaking of big guys, though, Steven Denmark is a big old cornerback, 6'2", 220 pounds. Yes, you heard that right, 6'2", 220, Valdosta State grad, way down south, go Blazers. They're members of the Gulf South Conference in NCAA Division II, and Denmark was on V-State's NCAA Division II National Championship team in 2018, playing a different position than he had played his first 3 years in college. He played wide receiver his first 3 years there, then switched to cornerback for his final year of collegiate ball and has played that position in the NFL so far. He has had brief stints with the Browns, the Bears, and the Steelers, not in that order. He was a Bears pick first, but you can see why people keep taking a chance on him. 9.36 relative athletic score. That score alone makes him one of the best athletes on the team right now. But if you look closer at his profile there, you get a pretty clear picture of what he is going to be if he sticks around in Green Bay, and frankly, if he sticks around anywhere. Mr. Denmark runs a 4.46 40-yard dash, so good, great, honestly, at that size, but terrible agility numbers. 4.27 in the short shuttle, 7.4 3-cone. Bad. But he is a big, thickly built guy that can run really fast in a straight line. What does that sound like to you? I think you're looking at a punt gunner there. And that's probably where the Packers are going to be looking at him. There's never a shortage of need for those guys that are willing to go pell-mell down the field absolutely as fast as they can with little regard to their own body. You need a certain number of those guys. And having a big one like Denmark around is never a bad thing. So maybe keep that name in the back of your mind, if not for making the initial 53 here. Maybe further down the line, he might be somebody they circle back to. Let's dive into a roster prediction. I feel pretty good about where we've been with these predictions so far. A couple circumstances have changed since the last time, well, over the course of training camp when we've done these. But really, this seems like a fairly easy roster to predict. It comes down to a few questions. First, how many cornerbacks are the Packers going to keep? If they keep 6, I think your 6 are pretty clear. But keeping more than that may depend on what they do at safety. Right now, I've got the Packers keeping 6 corners and 5 safeties. But that could easily change. If they keep 6 safeties, do you keep 5 corners? Do you go light somewhere else? So that's the first question. The second question is, how many offensive linemen do the Packers keep? I've got the Packers keeping 9 right now. But if they go heavier at another position, they might try to see if they can get by with 8, especially if they're going to have David Bakhtiari back sooner rather than later. Aaron Rodgers sounded somewhat surprised today, talking about David Bakhtiari potentially being unavailable for week 1. Somebody brought that up to him and kind of sounded like it was news to him, so you never know. Again, another thing to keep in the back of your mind there. But I'm operating under the assumption that Bakhtiari is not going to be ready for week 1. That doesn't seem like that big of a stretch. But even beyond that, I've got them keeping 9. Then how many quarterbacks do they keep? I kind of laid out my case briefly last time about why I think the Packers should only keep 2 quarterbacks. Should keep way more than 2 cornerbacks. But quarterbacks, I'm not all that hung up on the potential of losing Kurt Benkert. I mean, it's great to have a lot of quarterbacks around that you like, but if you're looking for a 7th corner or a 10th offensive lineman, Benkert would be my first cut. Just to dive right in here, I've got the Packers keeping 3 quarterbacks because I think that's just what they're going to do. If this was what they should do, I wouldn't have Benkert on the roster. But if we're predicting what I think the Packers will do, I think Benkert is going to stick around. So 3 quarterbacks, no surprise here. Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Kurt Benkert. Sounds good to you? Sounds good to me. If you want to push back and say Benkert shouldn't make it at all, I would agree with you. I just tend to think the Packers are going to keep 3. At running back, I think there's a case to be made for keeping 4. I think the Packers have enough bodies around where they could get away with that and it wouldn't look crazy. Patrick Taylor looks still like a good physical prospect. Dexter Williams has looked better in this camp than I think any we've seen from him so far. But ultimately, I think it's going to be 3 guys here. It's going to be Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon for sure. And then Kylan Hill has the 3rd spot locked up. At receiver, moving Devin Funchess to injured reserve cleaned up a lot of that picture. And Juwan Winfrey, having been injured for basically the last 2 weeks, makes it even more clear. Because beyond that, the competition for that 6th wide receiver spot comes down to Malik Taylor and Equanimeous St. Brown. Taylor has been healthy and available and making plays in the first 2 preseason games. Equanimeous St. Brown has not. So that leaves us with Devontae Adams, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Alan Lazard, Randall Cobb, and Amari Rodgers, as well as Taylor. 6 wide receivers. I don't think there's any chance that they're going to keep 7 anymore. We should talk a little bit about wide receivers a little bit more in depth, though. Got a couple takes here. First and foremost, it is really good to hear what Aaron Rodgers is saying about Marquez Valdes-Scantling. MVS has been a developmental project for most of his career to date. And there have been times when he's looked really, really good, and there have been times that he looks really, really bad. If you ask Aaron Rodgers, though, it sounds like MVS is looking really, really good, and it has way more to do with what he's doing off the field than what he's doing on the field.
I don't even want to talk about the receiver. I want to talk about the person. The person is in a way different headspace. I think he is so settled mentally, very clear, very present. There's habits that go along with that, I think, and I think they're interchangeable, personal, professional, but he's become a true professional. There were times a couple of years ago where we didn't know if we could count on him because he was inconsistent in his practice habits and his daily habits almost, but that's not the Marquez that I know now.
Consistency has always been an issue for Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Now that he appears to be at least getting them cleaned up in practice, we do have to wait and see if he can get it done in games, but if he's got a vote of confidence like that from Aaron Rodgers, things are pointed in the right direction. Rodgers in general seems pretty high in the receiving core that he's got too, and again, it comes down to as much who they are as people as the players themselves.
When you look at those four receivers that we have at the top of the depth chart, pretty special. You got the best guy in the league. You got three incredible role players, and that's said with the utmost amount of respect. Guys who, all three of them, as I answered earlier, very settled, stable guys, mentally off the field, and that allows them to be very focused competitors on the field. I think Allen and Marquez and Randall have had really good camps. They each bring a lot of different things to the table, but those guys have been a big part of us kind of gelling on offense. I feel like offensively, perimeter-wise, we've had a really nice camp.
Characterizing MVS, Allen Lazard, and Randall Cobb as elite role players kind of sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I actually think it's an incredible compliment. Everybody knows that role players are important. Think about yourself in the job that you have. Do you think that you are, if you take an honest look at yourself, do you think you're a superstar where everything is circling around you and what you can do, or are you more of a role player? Personally, in just about every job that I've had, I've been a lot more of a role player than I've been a superstar. But that can be a really rewarding thing. Being the solid right-hand man that your coworkers can count on no matter what, even if you're not the star of the show, is a really valuable thing in just about every line of work. To say nothing of how valuable it can be in team sports. And obviously, it's pretty valuable to the Packers. It's pretty valuable to Aaron Rodgers because now he's got four receivers on top of Robert Tonyan, on top of Mercedes Lewis, on top of Aaron Jones, on top of Josiah DeGuara that he can count on. And that's super, super valuable. The thing that bothers me a little bit about the Packers wide receiver core kind of has to do with the time it's taken to get here. So MVS was a late pick in 2018, a sixth-round pick. Allen Lazard, an undrafted free agent, not long after that. I think late 2018 season, actually. Randall Cobb obviously acquired this year. Amari Rodgers acquired this year as well. And Devontae Adams has been around for a long time. This has been a long developing receiving core, and it's really good now. But why did it take so long to get here? I think if you still want to argue that Brian Gutekunst should have put more resources into the receiver position before now, you might have a case. Wide receiver is a body-heavy position. It's one of only a few on the entire roster where I've got more than 5 players making it. It's the only skill position where you need that many guys. You don't need 5 or 6 quarterbacks. You don't need 5 or 6 running backs. You rarely are going to need more than 3 tight ends, although I've got 4 on the roster here. You need a lot of bodies. And I think in general, NFL teams should be investing more resources into their receivers and not less. Spend whatever it takes to get the guys that you like. And look, the Packers spent a little bit this year to add to this receiving core. Without a third-round pick, without trading for Randall Cobb, it would be Adams, MVS, and Lazard, and then some combination of Malik Taylor, Equinemius St. Brown, and Juwan Winfrey, and who knows what else. That's still a pretty shallow group beyond additions this year. To say nothing of what the receiving core could look like at this point next year. Investment gives you some backfill. We've talked about that in previous seasons a little bit too. The different kinds of draft picks. The true needs, the priority backfills, the flyers. Receivers should always be a position where you're backfilling. And the Packers haven't had a lot of depth there and wouldn't have a lot of depth there this year if not for a trade in a third-round pick that they could have had they been backfilling it a little bit more. This is maybe looking at the trees as opposed to the forest. But I think there's still a legitimate criticism of the approach here. Just because they got a good outcome with a bad process, or maybe a questionable process, we should say that, doesn't mean that the process was commendable. That's probably a discussion for a different day, though, especially after we see what the Packers ultimately do with the receivers they've got this year and who they are able to retain heading into next year as well. At tight end, no real surprises here. Daniel Crawford has been released. Isaac Nauta's on injured reserve. Jay Sternberger is going to be suspended to start the year. So what does that leave us with? Robert Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis, Josiah DeGuara, and Dominique Daphne. Bronson Kaufusi, a great story, but I don't think he's got the juice to make this roster right now. Would be a lot of fun to have another 6'7" tight end out there, though, especially one wearing number 45. Offensive line. This one gets a little bit complicated. This one gets a little bit uncertain for me. Right now, I've got Elton Jenkins, John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers, Royce Newman, and Billy Turner as your top five. The guards could get switched around a little bit, but that's my top five. Beyond that, Lucas Patrick and Ben Braden. I don't think any mysteries or surprises here as well. Beyond that, though, I've got Yosh Nijman and Cole Van Lanen. And you'll notice that means free agent signing Dennis Kelly is not there. I just don't know if you can count on Kelly right now, considering he's been injured basically in camp so far. I don't know if I'd want to go into the season with potentially one of my top two tackle backups being hurt. Nijman seems to have come on strong down the stretch here. He looked much better in preseason game number 2 than he did in game number 1. Got to remember some of these guys are playing in their first game in almost 2 years as well. Talking about Jordan Love being in that boat. Nijman didn't play any preseason games last year, and he didn't get any meaningful reps in the season last year. Maybe the speed's a little bit much for him right out of the gate there in preseason game number 1. But I think Nijman makes it, and I think Van Lanen makes it just because he's got guard tackle flexibility, and he's been healthy. I could see the Packers keeping 10. Maybe they roll the dice on keeping Kelly around just until David Bakhtiari comes back. But if Bakhtiari is back and ready for week 1, that complicates this a little bit too. Right now, I'm still operating under the assumption that Bakhtiari is not going to be there in week 1, and the Packers will have to roll with some of their guys instead. Watch the offensive line, though. 5 defensive linemen on my roster right now. Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry, Kingsley Keke are your top 3. No surprises there. Beyond that, TJ Slayton is going to make it. And I have Jack Heflin making it over Tyler Lancaster at this point. We've got to remember there are some practice squad spots up for grabs there as well. It's possible a guy like Lancaster could make his way back on the practice squad, though Willington Prevalon certainly a consideration there as well. I think Heflin has done enough, though, and he's another big body, big active body up front that could add a little bit to what the Packers do there, giving them a little bit more depth on the defensive line. On the edge, Za'Darius Smith, Rashawn Gary, no big surprises there. I'm not going to overthink it with Smith's injury. I'm just going to assume he's going to be healthy for week 1. I don't think they would risk putting him on the PUP list because he'd be out for 6 weeks at least. Maybe they sneak him through to the 53 and then put him on injured reserve right away and move some other pieces around there. But if they do that, you might see a name like Carlo Kemp or Chauncey Rivers at the bottom of the chart here. I don't think that's the case right now. Za'Darius Smith and Rashawn Gary are your top two guys. Preston Smith, your top guy after that. I think Jonathan Garvin for a little special teams continuity, and then Tipa Naliai is your fifth edge rusher there, kind of taking over the Randy Ramsey role on special teams as well. Don't forget about Kemp or Rivers making a run if that ends up being a question with Smith's availability, but right now I think it's those five. At inside linebacker, Oren Burks is going to make it, joining Devondre Campbell and Chris Barnes as well as Ty Summers. I think Isaiah McDuffie, they try to get through to the practice squad. At corner, I've got 6 right now without Isaac Yiadom. Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Kevin King are your top 3. Chandon Sullivan, your 4th guy. That order doesn't really matter because Sullivan's going to be playing in the slot. Shamar John-Charles, your 5th corner, and then Kabion Ento playing special teams and doing Kabion Ento things beyond that. At safety, Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage, Vernon Scott, Henry Black, and Christian Uphoff. Innis Gaines, the odd man out there. Again, depending on what the Packers want to do, they may keep him in addition to Uphoff and Black and Scott, or switch things around and keep more corners and only go with 5 safeties, and both Uphoff and Gaines end up on the outside looking in. A lot of people seem to like Innis Gaines. Watched his presser the other day. It's easy to see why. He's a likable guy. He plays hard on the field too. I think I like Uphoff's traits a little bit more, so that's where I skew there. Personal bias maybe, sure, but I go for the traitsy guys over the non-traitsy guys, and Uphoff is big and athletic, so keep him around. Specialist, no surprises, J.K. Scott, Mason Crosby, and Hunter Bradley. There's my 53-man roster prediction. We'll probably have it up in print on Monday. But there you go. Tear it apart. Tell me what you think. Where'd I go right? Where'd I go wrong? We will find out Tuesday afternoon. Season is right around the corner. And, of course, we do have the, looming possibility that injuries may play a role here, too. But let's try to think a little bit more positively than that. Blood, Sweat, and Chalk, Chapter 19, talks about spread stoppers. Overall impression of this chapter, got to say the 3-3-5, the 4-2-5 as schemes are not all that interesting. But I think looking at the 3-3-5 in particular as a symbol of what defense is about is interesting. Gary Patterson quote, I think on the second to the last page of this chapter, really jumped out to me. He said, let's say an offense runs 60 plays, which is about average for a game. You're going to need a better call than them on about 30 of those plays. It takes a lot of work, a lot of preparation, and every offense is different. Texas Tech plays the spread. Air Force runs the triple option. Later on in the chapter, he says, quote, all you're trying to do is get the offense back to the huddle, not kicking off. That really is defense in a nutshell. It's about slowing them down. It's not about pitching shutouts, winning 3-0, or anything like that. You're just trying to win about half of the plays. And that does take a lot of work. It does take a lot of preparation because everything that you're doing is reactive. You have to react to what the offense is doing. It's a lot harder to take the game to them. A couple chapters back, we talked about the 46 defense. Last chapter, we talked about the zone blitz. Those are all examples of attacking the offense. The 3-3-5 is less that. It's more reactive. And how the 3-3-5 came about is also an interesting example of being reactive. So this all starts with Joe Lee Dunn's 5-3-3 defense, which is just laughable here in 2021. Just imagine going out there with 5 down linemen, 3 linebackers, and 3 defensive backs. You're going to go out there and stop Aaron Rodgers with 5 down linemen and 3 linebackers, 8 guys in the box, 8 big bodies in the box, and you've got Aaron Rodgers and his 4 premium receivers out there that he likes a lot. Good luck. You're going to try to slow down Marquez Valdes-Scantling with 3 defensive backs? Have a good time with that. I think it's interesting, though, that he developed the 3-3-5 while at New Mexico State, learning from BYU's wacky passing offense, because his time at New Mexico State coincided with Mike Holmgren's time at BYU. No wonder they were thrown around a bunch. I think it's also interesting in this chapter that size and speed on defense come down as much to resources as preference. So if you think about recruiting in college football as an economy, which it kind of is, because there are limited commodities available just of players, there's only so many of them out there that you can sign and bring to your team. Think about supply and demand. You can very quickly see how offensive and defensive shifts, offensive and defensive schemes, trends in the entire sport can be driven just by what's available. So say a lot of offenses sign a lot of big guys. That means fewer big guys for the defense to sign. So the defense can't get as big. So what does the defense do? It tries to counter big offenses by getting fast. Well, then the offense says, well, these defenses are so fast, we got to get fast. So offenses get faster to counter. That takes away offensive players from the defensive side of the ball. The defense can't get as fast. So defenses decide, well, since we can't be as fast, I guess we might as well get really big and we can beat up on the offense. And around and around and around it goes. This chapter also contained perhaps the best explanation, I think, of leverage that we've seen in the book so far. So Cody Alexander, in our interview with him, mentioned the concept of leverage and levers on defense and things like that. He gave good explanation of it. This provides, I think, a little bit more insight into that. So leverage is pretty simple. Don't let yourself basically get outflanked no matter where you are on the field. If you're in deep coverage, don't let anybody get deeper than you. This is where they talk about speed receivers taking the top off the defense. You lose leverage. If you're wide as a defender, don't let people get wider than you. If it's your job to stay wide, don't let them get wider than you. Think about how we talk about defensive linemen, edge rushers, linebackers setting the edge. That's leverage. If you're on the inside of the defense, don't let people get inside of you. Don't get kicked out. Don't get displaced to the outside if you're supposed to be going inside. All of those leverage principles come into play in reacting to the offense, and this chapter really got into the defense's job of reacting to the offense very well. That's all I've got for you in this episode. I appreciate you checking us out. Appreciate you downloading. I appreciate you sharing this with a friend. That's the number one way this show grows, sharing it with people who you think would enjoy it. So if there's someone in your life that you think would enjoy this podcast and more Packers talk, do me a big favor and share it with them. That's going to help more people find the show, and it's going to get more people involved in this conversation we're having around the Green Bay Packers, which ultimately is a very, very good thing because it helps all of us, me included, become smarter Packers fans. And as I always say, smarter Packers fans are better Packers fans, and better Packers fans are what we all want to be. I'm your host, John Meerdink. We'll see you next time on Blue 58.